To the world, she was Laura Ingalls. But in private, Melissa Gilbert was hiding a secret so devastating it nearly destroyed her. First, the illusion of her perfect family was shattered by her father's senseless choice to end his life. Then, the illusion of perfect love was destroyed in a brutal public breakup. This is the agonizing true story of how Melissa Gilbert, she would ascend to become America's sweetheart, the living heartbeat of American television, an iconic symbol of pastoral virtue and familial closeness. But her very first breath was met not by her mother's comforting flesh and blood arms, but the chilling institutional silence of a life already bound by the rigid constraint of legal paper and the often empty currency of Hollywood promises. This is the deeply complex, layered story of the darkness that ceaselessly chased the sunlit girl, the one who carried the weighty burden of the Prairie's perceived innocence upon her small, emotionally overburdened shoulders. She internalized the desperate need to be flawless and perfect because she learned early her position in the world was purely contractual and perpetually conditional. The brightest stars, it often seems, are not found soaring freely, but are tragically born beneath the darkest, most complicated skies. While some children enter this world wrapped securely in soft lullabies and the unconditional comfort of familiar bloodlines, Melissa Gilbert arrived wrapped in a profound, unsettling, and defining silence. A relentless destiny, a series of existential tests, was waiting patiently to challenge and ultimately break the very core of her spirit and will. She was born in May of 1964 in Los Angeles, California, a sprawling, glittering city that promised impossible dreams on its endless billboards, but initially offered her none of its authentic, grounding warmth. Within a mere 24 hours, her life belonged not to the sacred bond of biological blood, but to the fragile hope and legal custody of strangers. Actor and comedian Paul Gilbert and his wife Barbara Crane, a dancer and actress. They promised love and stability through the cold formality of paper and signatures, legally welcoming the infant into their vibrant, emotionally chaotic Hollywood home. The legal adoption papers felt less like a benevolent beginning and more like a quiet, binding contract that dictated her entire future, assigning her a predefined, critical role in a family drama she was instantly expected to perform without the luxury of rehearsal, genuine connection, or emotional honesty. The constant threat of the unknown loomed over her earliest years. At first, their house seemed absolutely full of the electric, manic energy of show business. The endless lines, repetitive rehearsals, the sound of sudden brittle laughter, and the distinct, cloying, yet exciting scent of stage makeup and hairspray. The very air crackled with ambition and creative chaos, meticulously masking deep internal fissures and suffering. But behind the curtain of this dazzling public life, the family's internal lights began to flicker erratically, casting long, unpredictable, and ultimately frightening shadows across the nursery walls. Their lives spun relentlessly around the demanding schedules of studios, agents, and cameras, leaving young Melissa to wander, physically present but profoundly lost, between the intense artificial glow of television sets and the quiet, desolate corners of loneliness. Paul's frantic public humor often masked a deep, underlying exhaustion, a consuming sorrow he fought desperately to keep hidden even from himself. The tragic comedian who could command the world's laughter, but could never quiet the agonizing noise in his own head. Barbara's artistic grace carried a profound, unfulfilled restlessness that no amount of applause or fleeting, superficial beauty could truly soothe. The infant's sanctuary in Hollywood was, in reality, a gilded, isolating cage built upon dangerously fragile illusions, where the familial stability and unconditional acceptance she desperately craved was always, agonizingly, just out of reach. She learned to read the shifting, unpredictable moods of the adults around her like complex, dangerous scripts, knowing her own security depended entirely on her silence and compliance. By the time Melissa was 6 years old, the applause for her parents' union had faded completely into harsh, whispered arguments and the terrifying final slam of closed doors. The marriage broke apart with a final, echoing crash that reverberated painfully in her small chest, and with it, the child's entire, carefully constructed sense of safety shattered into irreparable pieces. The deafening noise of the conflict was quickly replaced by the equally terrifying, profound silence of an emotionally empty home. She stayed with her mother, moving with weary, anticipatory familiarity from one temporary rental to the next, constantly watching new, unfamiliar walls replace old ones as quickly as people's fervent promises seemed to break in her young, fragile life. This profound domestic seismic shift taught her an unforgettable and heartbreaking lesson, etched indelibly into her soul, that the most essential, life-sustaining love could vanish from a house without a single sound, leaving behind a cold, desolate, and terrifying emptiness that no temporary professional success could ever truly fill. This early foundational betrayal of security became the psychological blueprint for her future struggles with intimacy, trust, and commitment. An invisible, festering wound of abandonment that she carried like a secret burden of shame into every single relationship she ever attempted to build. The quiet desperation of her childhood became her internal soundtrack, a counterpoint to the eventual thunder of applause. Her father, the man who had given her his gentle warmth and his foundational name, drifted sadly out of reach, both physically and emotionally distant, till one tragic day he was gone entirely. Melissa was just 11, an age when children are supposed to be discovering safety and protection, when the devastating news came that Paul Gilbert had ended his own life. The family, consumed by desperation and the protective instinct to shield the young star from a sorrow too brutal to comprehend and too complicated for the public narrative, initially explained that his heart had failed, that his passing was a sudden, tragic accident of nature. For many years, the young girl whispered goodnight to his photograph, finding comfort in the desperate self-constructed belief that he had simply and peacefully fallen asleep forever, protecting herself from the concept of intentional loss. She painstakingly constructed an entire protective narrative of quiet, natural rest around the violent, hidden truth. The institutional silence of the adoption was thus profoundly compounded by the agonizing silence of the lie, creating a deep, churning well of unresolved grief and moral confusion that would fester beneath the seamless surface of her public smile for decades, relentlessly consuming her fragile sense of true identity and self-worth. That devastating revelation, which only came many years later, finally broke the final vestiges of her innocence, but it also carved out the essential, painful space where her legendary, unyielding resilience would take root. The child who once searched so desperately for a comforting heartbeat now learned to exist without one nearby, compensating with a ferocious professional commitment to her career. She confessed to the tremendous, unrelenting pressure of her early life, recalling the days when intense sadness and profound confusion hid just beneath the sparkling, commercially viable surface of a young star's freckles. The soundstage, with its rigid rules, reliable script, and predictable cues, became her only constant, reliable sanctuary against the chaos of her personal life. "I had to smile when I was dying inside," she admitted, articulating the constant, agonizing conflict between her flawlessly cheerful public role and the private, terrifying reality of her internal grief. Her professional mask was a meticulously crafted, impenetrable shield, concealing a desperate child fighting for emotional survival in an adult world that demanded flawless, immediate, and continuously televised perfection. While other children laughed freely in sunlit playgrounds and focused on normal school activities, Melissa memorized lines beneath the relentless, scorching heat of studio lights. Her playground was the film set, and her audience became the only functional, permanent family that never packed up and left. Millions would soon see her as Laura Ingalls Wilder, the sunlit girl running through endless golden fields, embodying the very spirit of courage and hope the nation desperately sought. Yet no one saw the persistent shadows chasing her off screen. Every smile she gave the world was a calculated act of will, one she could not afford to give herself, a debt paid to the public that constantly drained her inner emotional resources. The ache that once threatened to completely consume her became the sacred source of her most honest, visceral art. In every tear she shed on screen, in every moment of quiet vulnerability and raw defiance, lived that little girl from Los Angeles, the one who began life without a mother's arms, who had lost her father not just once, but twice, yet somehow kept the essential light of hope alive, flickering against the immense darkness. Her profound ability to tap into that raw, primal grief for her performances was the emotional secret behind her profound, enduring connection with the audience, a connection that rooted her character in authentic human struggle and gave her acting an unsettling, honest depth that resonated globally. Her story is a testament that even the smallest, most fragile human flame can survive the darkest, most overwhelming silence. And sometimes that very struggle, that relentless, lonely fight for survival, is precisely what allows it to shine forever, waiting patiently for the world to discover its true, hard-won, and ultimately profound brilliance. For a time, the Gilbert house felt like a sanctuary, full of music and the hopeful ambition of a young Hollywood family. But in Tinseltown, where even the most golden illusions are often dangerously fragile, the bright lights began to flicker, and the laughter faded, leaving behind only the cold, definitive sound of a door slowly closing. The separation of her adoptive parents, Paul Gilbert and Barbara Crane, when Melissa was just 6 years old, shattered her earliest sense of stability and belonging. This profound domestic seismic shift taught the small girl an unforgettable and heartbreaking lesson, etched indelibly into her memory. That love, the thing most essential to survival, could vanish from a house without a sound. As the years passed, her father, the gentle man who had given her his warmth and his foundational name, sadly drifted out of reach, both physically and emotionally distant. Then, when Melissa was only 11, the final permanent news arrived. She was told her father had experienced a sudden, tragic medical condition, an explanation she accepted for years as a devastating accident of fate. Finding fragile comfort in the idea of a peaceful sleep, she whispered goodnight to his photograph every night, desperately maintaining a self-protective, fictionalized connection to the man she thought she knew. Only later, as an adult, did she uncover the brutal, unvarnished truth of his passing. It wasn't illness that took him, but sorrow too heavy to bear. This profound silence, the decades-long family lie, tested her spirit more profoundly than any previous loss. The passing of her father was not due to a failing heart, but was instead a choice made in a moment of emotional crisis, a crushing burden of sorrow too heavy to bear alone. This devastating revelation came to her long after she had become a public icon, scarring the final layers of her deepest innocence and trust. As she admitted with the quiet grace that became her trademark, "It broke me twice." The child, who had spent her earliest years searching for a comforting heartbeat, was now forced to confront the shattering knowledge that she had been living with a profound, foundational silence near her all along. The knowledge that her father had suffered in secret, and that her family had kept that suffering, and the truth of his despair a secret, was a second, more complicated, and enduring form of abandonment that she carried into her adult life, shaking the very foundation of her identity and trust in the world. She found herself having to reconcile the cheerful, freckled, flawless public image she presented to the world with the profound, unmanageable, private grief she carried in secret. "I had to smile when I was dying inside," she once confessed. The child who once faced abandonment and betrayal learned to transform that raw ache into a visceral, compelling art. She began her legendary career not by chasing the fleeting illusion of fame, but by chasing the feeling of functional belonging that the film set offered, an environment that promised a reliable schedule, a clear script, and a sense of shared purpose that never seemed to leave. While other children played freely in sunlit yards, Melissa Gilbert memorized lines beneath the relentless, scorching heat of studio lights. Los Angeles in the early 1970s was a mirage of glitter and relentless hunger, an unforgiving landscape of endless competition. She was one of many hopefuls, shuttled from one audition to the next by her mother. The script pages in her anxious hands crumpled from nervous effort. Casting directors barely looked up from their clipboards, some murmuring she was too small. Others whispered she was too plain. Rejection, in a strange, cruel way, became her earliest school of resilience and self-control. She learned early how to keep smiling, even when the door closed abruptly in her face, a professional survival skill essential in the cutthroat world of child acting. Then the moment arrived that would change everything. A new series, Little House on the Prairie, was searching for its heart. A girl whose eyes could simultaneously hold a luminous innocence and an enduring resilience. When the young actress entered the room, she didn't simply perform the scene. She fully embodied the character, pulling from her own deep wells of experience. The silence after her audition was long, an almost sacred hush, until Michael Landon, the show's esteemed star and producer, delivered the phrase that sealed her destiny. That's her. That's Laura. The soundstage, with its controlled environment and reliable schedules, suddenly became the only true home that didn't leave. The lights were the consistent, predictable presence she had always craved. The applause that followed the show's incredible, immediate success was thunderous, echoing from living rooms coast to coast, giving her a sense of validation she desperately lacked at home. A validation tied directly to her professional performance and the public's love. Millions saw a girl laughing in open meadows, the epitome of frontier innocence and American virtue. But the immense success of Little House on the Prairie came with a relentless, punishing schedule, a merciless grind that tested every ounce of childhood Melissa Gilbert had left. Her days were consumed by 12-hour shifts under the relentless California sun, filming scenes of cold, hunger, and hardship, while her small body ached beneath layers of heavy calico and sweat. The world saw a golden-haired girl smiling in sunlit fields, but behind the camera, she was perpetually exhausted, her energy dangerously depleted by the continuous emotional effort required to sustain the illusion. At 10, I was America's sweetheart. At 16, I was a product. Childhood and career had fused into one perfect, seamless illusion, leaving no psychological space for Melissa, the vulnerable girl behind the perfect role. Every expression, every gesture, every moment of silence was meticulously measured by the cameras and the relentless, suffocating expectations of millions, demanding a level of flawless, unflagging maturity few adults could ever sustain. The internal pressure was immense, a silent, daily trauma that slowly chipped away at her private self. When the beloved show finally lowered its curtain in 1983, the thunderous applause turned into a chilling, echoing silence. The close signaled the painful, definitive end of the chapter on the child the world had claimed as its own. Casting directors, once charmed, began to hesitate. "She's too familiar, too pure, too remembered," they whispered, finding it impossible to separate the adult woman from the nostalgic, idealized image of the child star. Melissa was not a woman made to simply disappear into the silence. She demonstrated fierce versatility, embodying Helen Keller's profound strength in The Miracle Worker and carrying the weight of faith and sacrifice in subsequent roles. The ascent was brutal. Scripts slipped away, projects collapsed, and critics murmured that her light had dimmed, threatened by the debilitating stigma of her childhood success. Hollywood has a short memory. "You have to remind it who you are every single day," she said years later. recognizing that survival in Tinseltown demanded constant, exhausting, and often painful reinvention and proof of her adult viability and worth. This unyielding drive for self-definition led to a transformation few could have foreseen. From 2001 to 2005, Melissa Gilbert rose again, not under the glare of studio lights, but beneath the purposeful, serious fluorescent lighting of leadership. She was elected and served as president of the Screen Actors Guild, AG. In this pivotal, powerful role, she represented more than 120,000 performers across the entire United States. The same girl who once quietly memorized lines now stood proudly before Congress, demanding fair wages, dignified health care, and respect for the working performer. It was a role that leveraged every lesson she had ever learned about fighting for survival and being seen, turning her personal battles against Hollywood's casual cruelty into a potent political strength and a defense of her peers. I spent my life finding my voice. Now I use it to protect others, she said with quiet pride, a profound transformation from the silent, desperate child seeking acceptance. She transformed the raw ache of her chaotic childhood into a determined institutional voice for structure and equity in the very industry that had raised and nearly broken her. Fame had tested her endurance, but love would soon test her soul, leading to the kind of profound, existential sorrow that no measure of applause or political victory could ever hope to drown. It began in 1981, beneath the restless shimmer of Los Angeles nights, when two rising stars collided. Melissa Gilbert was just 17, radiant, and still carrying the hopeful, open-hearted innocence of the Prairie girl. Rob Lowe was the very definition of Hollywood's golden boy. Extraordinarily handsome, charismatic, and already a rising constellation, they fell into a romance with the kind of fierce, blinding velocity only the young and hopeful can manage. Days blurred into easy laughter, long drives down Sunset Boulevard, and stolen, secret phone calls after midnight. Fervent promises exchanged on napkins. For the first time in her deeply complicated life, she felt she wasn't being watched as a celebrity. She was simply being seen as a woman, finding a fragile, secret haven between the flashes of fame and the ever-present camera shutters. Then, at 19 years old, came the moment that changed everything. Melissa discovered she was expecting a child. For her, this was a quiet, personal form of salvation, a tangible, real chance to finally create the stable, loving family she had been denied in her own chaotic childhood. She began to dream of simple wedding vows, of a small white house with a picket fence and the sound of a child's laughter, believing profoundly that love had finally and fully chosen her. But in the unpredictable, often cruel terrain of Tinseltown, dreams are frequently made of glass. Before the vows could be exchanged, Rob Lowe was gone, not out of malice or deliberate cruelty, but out of a profound, youthful, paralyzing fear of adult responsibility that eclipsed their fervent promises. The fear that motivated his sudden departure wounded her deeper than anger ever could, proving that the security she sought was still a fragile, unattainable illusion. The heartbreak of his leaving might have been enough to manage, but fate was not finished testing her capacity for pain. Not long after, Melissa experienced the devastating loss of the child she was carrying. In one moment, she was tracing a radiant, certain future in her mind, choosing names and dreaming of nurseries. In the next, she was staring at a terrifying emptiness no language could adequately contain. She had suffered a double sorrow, the profound parting from the man she thought she'd spent her life with, and the absolute final loss of the life that could have been born from that love. She sat quietly by the window, her hand resting over her aching heart, enduring a grief that seemed to exist in stereo, and learned what true, absolute silence sounds like in the sudden painful vacuum of a future violently erased. The profound emptiness, once a paralyzing threat, became the quiet proof of her own fierce, unexpected resilience. Out of that hollow space, she began the painstaking, years-long work of rebuilding her sense of self, piece by piece. relying only on her own internal resources. Years later, she would call that chapter the heartbreak that taught me who I was. It broke me twice, but maybe you have to break to understand how to rebuild, she said softly, articulating the deep, earned wisdom of her survival. She realized she was not the victim or the fallen starlet, but a young woman who possessed an extraordinary capacity to stand again, leaning on an inner strength forged in fire and sorrow. The hard-won clarity guided her into the next hopeful chapter. It had been barely a year since the loss when she met actor Bo Brinkman. Her choice was not rooted in recklessness, but in a desperate, deeply human longing to feel whole again after the shattering experience of the double sorrow. Brinkman was undeniably charming, intensely focused, and carried the same compelling, wild pulse that beat beneath Hollywood's glamorous, restless veins. Crucially, he seemed to understand her internal chaos, her hunger to be truly seen and accepted without pretense. To Melissa, Bo felt like a sudden, unexpected peace after a long, drawn-out war, a familiar soul who promised a temporary sanctuary in a world that had never once stopped spinning under the weight of her fame. By 1988, they were married, two hopeful hearts attempting to construct something resilient and real out of the emotional ruins of their previous failures. And when their son, Dakota Paul Brinkman, was born the following year, it felt as though the universe had finally granted Melissa her second, deeply desired chance at stability and family. For a time, life was golden, illuminated by the sheer, unadulterated joy of motherhood, a profound counterbalance to her earlier loss. For a while, she once recalled, we were everything I'd ever dreamed. A family, a beginning, a chance to do love right this time. Their mornings were filled with the gentle scent of baby lotion and the comforting routine of burnt coffee, a domestic rhythm she fiercely protected as tangible proof of her hard-won normalcy. But real life, even in the gilded cage of Hollywood, is never so neatly scripted. Love, once her sanctuary, slowly transformed into an emotional storm. Fame pulled their lives in distinctly separate directions. Old wounds quietly reopened, and the daily exhaustion eventually curdled tenderness into tension. Sharp words began to replace laughter, and the silences between them grew long and heavy, weighted unspoken resentments and the immense pressure of maintaining a public facade. In the profound loneliness that expanded between them, one heart sadly wandered where it should not have, searching for a fleeting comfort in the wrong place. A desperate attempt to fill a void that only self-acceptance could truly mend. We were two people who loved each other deeply, but love alone doesn't always save you, she would later reflect with remarkable composure and wisdom. In 1992, what had begun with solemn vows and golden sunlight ended in legal documents and tears, leaving her once again alone with her children and facing the cold, public reality of failure. 3 years later, she married actor and director Bruce Boxleitner. She was no longer chasing rescue. She was deliberately choosing peace and a partnership built on mature understanding and shared life experience. He was a calming, intelligent presence who carried the gentle authority of someone who had already navigated the perils of fame without allowing it to corrupt his spirit. We didn't fall in love like lightning. It was slower, steadier, the kind of love you can build a life on, she noted, valuing stability and companionship over blinding, unpredictable passion. They exchanged vows in 1995 and later welcomed a child of their own, Michael Garrett Boxleitner, named in honor of her beloved mentor, Michael Landon. After decades of emotional chaos, she had finally found a stillness she once thought was impossible to attain. She called it the most grown-up love I'd ever known, a commitment founded on partnership, mutual respect, and functional domesticity, rather than fleeting youthful passion. But even the stillest water hides deep, unseen currents. Bruce's world, dictated by his career, pulled him from set to set, requiring long, unpredictable absences, while Melissa juggled her own professional endeavors. The immense responsibility of motherhood and the fragile, delicate art of self-preservation. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the warmth began its slow descent into a cool distance, often starting with the two of them turning away from each other in the very same bed, emotionally exhausted by the immense effort of maintaining their dual careers and blended family. What began as small, manageable misunderstandings grew over time into long, aching absences, eroding the foundation of trust and intimacy. After 16 years, 16 birthdays, shared Christmas mornings, and quiet, shared tears, they made the solemn decision to part ways in 2011. There was no grand scandal, only two mature people standing together in the quiet truth. Their paths had irrevocably diverged, and the necessary energy to bridge the gap was gone. "It broke my heart, but it was necessary," she whispered, acknowledging that remaining together would have caused more profound, slow suffering than choosing to walk away with grace and dignity. She had walked through the fire of disappointment and discovered the sheer, unyielding strength required to survive it alone. She had stopped looking for love to complete her, and that, perhaps inevitably, is precisely when it found her. When she met actor and director Timothy Busfield in 2012, the prevailing feeling was one of deep, abiding warmth, familiarity, and relief. This was not the headlong, reckless passion of her youth. It was a mature connection built on mutual respect and shared experience. Two seasoned souls meeting on equal ground, recognizing the same quiet scars. "He made me laugh, but more than that, he made me exhale," she said, describing the profound comfort he offered to her weary soul. In 2013, they made a courageous and defining departure from Hollywood's relentless noise, relocating to a quiet, unassuming farmhouse nestled deep in the Catskill Mountains of New York. For the first time in Melissa's long performing life, her intrinsic worth was not measured in applause, box office receipts, or fluctuating ratings, but in the steady, honest rhythm of the seasons. "It was the first time I'd ever felt truly at home," she realized with profound clarity, recognizing that home was a state of being found within a stable partnership, not a glamorous location. They patiently sanded the original floors, painted the walls with warm, earthy tones, and constructed a life built by their own four hands and shared labor. She would later write, "Some loves arrive early and burn fast. Ours came late, slow, steady, and meant to last, valuing the deliberate, enduring quality of their connection." In 2010, while performing on the popular competition program, Dancing with the Stars, Melissa took a fall so sudden and violent that the entire world seemed to tilt into a terrifying silence. She courageously finished the demanding performance, smiling, graceful, and radiant under the hot lights, ensuring the show continued seamlessly. But when the cameras stopped their silent turning, she could not stand. The final diagnosis arrived like a crash of thunder: a fractured spine. Surgeons were required to fuse her injured vertebrae with an intricate latticework of metal rods and screws, effectively rebuilding her from the inside out. It took many months of agonizing physical therapy before she could move without tears of effort and struggle. "They fixed my back, but they didn't touch my spirit," she reflected, determined to view the injury as just another chapter in her fight for survival. A brutal physical reminder of the heavy burdens she had carried for decades. This physical trauma, however, opened the door to quiet, deeper fractures. Pain has a way of leaving a resounding echo long after the immediate physical source ceases to hurt, creeping into the mind and spirit. Sleepless nights began to plague her. Anxiety crept relentlessly inward, soon followed by the heavy, suffocating fog of profound sadness and depression. She confessed years later that she turned to copious amounts of alcohol as a desperate attempt to fill the growing emptiness and numb the incessant physical discomfort. The glass became her unfortunate shield against the silence and the relentless internal pressure to remain perpetually perfect for an industry that constantly chases the fleeting illusion of youth. The emotional toll was exacerbated by the external pressures of Hollywood, an industry that holds unforgiving, often cruel, standards for its leading ladies. As she reached her 50s, the cameras began to turn away, perpetually chasing younger faces and smoother skin. "They stopped calling, and I started disappearing," she said with palpable sadness. Every new wrinkle felt like a harsh sentence, and every professional rejection became a fresh wound that chipped away at her hard-won self-regard. Her reflection in the mirror began to resemble a stranger, no longer the lively, beloved girl America adored, but a woman the unforgiving cameras no longer wished to see. To compound her internal struggle, a new, bizarre affliction arrived. Doctors eventually labeled the condition misophonia, a neurological disorder that rendered common, ordinary sounds utterly unbearable. A fork gently scraping a plate, the tapping of a pen on a desk, or even someone's breathing could suddenly send waves of excruciating panic, anger, and distress through her chest. "It was like thunder in my skull," she explained. She felt terrifyingly trapped inside her own ears, imprisoned by the mundane sounds of the world she was trying to join. Crowds, once necessary for her profession, became impossible to navigate. Quiet and solitude, which she had sought for emotional healing, suddenly became her only necessary refuge, severely limiting her ability to work and socialize. By 2015, after enduring years of this triple burden, physical pain, emotional despair, and neurological hypersensitivity, Melissa reached a decisive breaking point. Federal reports indicated she owed nearly $360,000 in back taxes, a staggering sum that could have easily overwhelmed her and her newly stable life. This financial catastrophe, fueled by 2 dissolved marriages and years of erratic celebrity income, represented the total, devastating collapse of the Hollywood dream, forcing a brutal, final reckoning. But the woman who had fought so bravely to redefine herself faced the challenge head-on. She worked diligently, she wrote, and she made the difficult decision to sell her California home. She ensured that every single dollar owed was honorably settled, choosing personal integrity and solvency over public denial. Today, after clearing her financial obligations and methodically rebuilding her life from the very foundations up, her estimated net worth stands at a modest $500,000. While this figure is certainly a humble number in the often inflated world of Hollywood royalty, it is a sum she carries with quiet, profound pride. The true essence of her wealth, she realized, was what she now possessed that was truly hers, earned through immense personal resilience, painful sacrifice, and honest labor, not the often fleeting illusion of celebrity income. That year, she also made one of the most personal and defining choices of her life, electing to remove her breast implants. For years, these implants had represented her silent, uneasy agreement with the persistent, harsh demands of an industry obsessed with the illusion of perpetual youth. It was a conscious decision to shed a piece of her past persona, a powerful shift toward radical self-acceptance and health. "I wanted to feel real again," she reflected. She realized that the beautiful, polished armor she had worn to please Hollywood had, in fact, become the ultimate psychological confinement. The procedure was physically demanding, but the pain she endured was viewed as a necessary cost for her freedom. When the bandages were finally removed, she was overcome with a profound, liberating sense of freedom, finally seeing her own reflection without the intervention of artifice or studio demand. She now lives in the Catskill farmhouse, where her worth is measured not in fame, but in the simple, profound warmth of a shared cup of coffee. The humble 15-acre farmhouse, a property she and Timothy acquired for less than $100,000, became her true sanctuary. Their mornings are deliberate and fragrant, filled with the aroma of coffee and the deep, earthy scent of wet soil. Their evenings conclude with the gentle, calming sound of the wind whispering through the ancient trees. She plants her garden, patiently learning the complex beauty of cultivating her own harvest. They constructed a small chicken coop together, often laughing when the nails bent or the roof tilted sideways, finding joy in their shared, imperfect effort. "It wasn't glamorous," she said, but it was ours. She would later write, with the wisdom of hindsight, that her new, mature love with Busfield did not require perfection. What she truly needed, and finally found, was peace. She learned that love wasn't about the absence of disagreement. It was about remembering that they were both fiercely fighting for the very same thing, a life of shared contentment and mutual respect. You can find peace anywhere, she realized. It's not where you live, it's who you're with. On quiet afternoons, she stands by the restored window of her farmhouse, her hands often still lightly stained with earth, and looks out over the burgeoning rows of basil and roses. The golden sunlight streams across her face, and she reflects on how far she has traveled. From a young girl performing for the world's constant attention to a mature woman who can finally, truly breathe in silence and security. Her creative spirit thrives not on set, but in her writing. Her introspective memoirs, Prairie Tale and Back to the Prairie, became bestsellers, connecting her to millions of dedicated readers who recognized their own struggles and resilience in her story. The pages were filled with humility, honesty, and the quiet, enduring wisdom that only time and great effort can bestow. It took me 60 years, she wrote, to understand that love doesn't rescue you. It meets you where you are when you're finally ready to stay. The woman who once ran barefoot through Hollywood's immense, glittering fields now walks steady and sure on her own hard-won ground. I used to think happiness was applause. Now it's the sound of chickens and coffee brewing. Her courageous final act is teaching us that a woman who once lost everything eventually found something greater, herself. Her final wisdom is a gift to us all. That love may not always arrive early, but it always arrives precisely right on time. She has achieved the rare cinematic ending of an icon who found her most fulfilling role not on a brightly lit soundstage, but in the simple, quiet reality of a life lived on her own dignified terms. And that, after everything, is truly the greatest love story of all. Melissa Gilbert proved that a life well lived is a story worth telling. If her journey from prairie star to self-made woman inspired you, please take a moment to like this video, subscribe to our channel, and comment below. What is the single biggest lesson you took from Melissa's incredible resilience?